Well, I was thinking about the title for my sermon, and we're going to be in Joshua chapter 6. If you've got your Bibles, you can open up there. We're going to just touch on a few verses, so I'll ask you to open up and to follow along. Joshua chapter 6, and it might be titled in your Bible, Taking the Land. I thought that might be a little bit of a controversial title for us here this morning. So instead of that, I've gone with How We Receive the Promise. And so we're going to be looking at today how we receive God's promises that He has laid up and stored up for us. And so the last few weeks, it hasn't been intentional, but we've been looking at, for the last 2 weeks, we've been looking at how we fight our battles. I started off 3 weeks ago on that and then felt to continue last week and just feel this week to go around this story because I believe there's some promises God is wanting us to have courage in our hearts to go after and pursue that He has already won and made available for us. And so it touches on this battle once again. And so I just trust that you journey with me as we look at it. So we start off by looking at the walls of Jericho. And many of us have heard about the walls of Jericho. Maybe you haven't, and it's your first time hearing about it today. But these walls were an immense prospect that the Israelites faced when they were coming out of Egypt and into the promised land. It says of these walls that they wrapped around the city like a suit of armor. 2 concentric lines of walls that each were raised up to about 40 feet of height. And these walls were impenetrable. That's the walls of Jericho. What we also see in this story is Jericho's inhabitants. They were said to be a ferocious, barbaric people. They had been able to withstand every siege that had come against them up to that time. And they really practiced a lot of idol worship, as well as they did child sacrifices and various other things. And no one had been able to oppose them until this moment, until the day that Joshua showed up, until the army of God marched in. Until that time, they had never faced opposition that threatened their walls. But in this moment, the walls are starting to crack. The stones are starting to break. The boulders are starting to be deconstructed. Everything is starting to shake, including the knees of their soldiers, because this untoppable fortress is suddenly meeting an unstoppable force in what God is doing. And so that's what's unfolding here. And it's all around this man, Joshua. Now, at this point, when you're hearing the story, you can think that Joshua must be some amazing warrior for God. This guy must be mighty. He must carry all sorts of authority. I mean, what sort of man can lay siege to these walls and in his wisdom and strength lead an army to bring them down? But that's not really what's taking place as we read this story. What we see about Joshua is that he didn't bring the walls down. What we see about Joshua is he never swung a hammer. He never took a pick. He never dislodged a brick. He never did anything that would weaken the doors through his wisdom and strategy of where to go. He never loosened a stone. All of the shaking, all of the quaking, all of the crumbling, all of the deconstructing, all of the falling down was done in and of God's mighty power that was made manifest in that moment. And my encouragement with us here this morning is that He can do it again. Some of us are in that place where we're facing these so-called walls of Jericho. Maybe you're facing some of these walls that have seemed like they could never be toppled. They're impregnable. You can't get through them. You can't get through to what you believe your purpose is, your promises, the promise of what God is wanting to take you in. Maybe your walls are fear. Maybe your walls are anger or bitterness or anxiety or prejudice or insecurity about your future. Maybe that wall that you're facing is guilt about your past. Maybe that wall that you're facing is your tendency to overanalyze and compartmentalize, and it distracts you from ever looking forward and seeing what God wants you to see. You see, Jerichos are often our mindsets and are often our attitudes, these things that overshadow the life that God is wanting us to be living and the promise that He's wanting us to be stepping into. And we all face these at various times. We all face those things that stop us from exiting out of that wilderness, that no man's land, and entering into what we really believe is our purpose and promise in God. Each of us have faced those moments in our lives. And this is the context of this moment. The Israelites have been enslaved in Egypt for 400 years. Now they've been taken out of Egypt, and for 40 years they've been led around the desert. They've come out of Egypt, but what we see as we read is that Egypt hadn't come out of them. They had been moved they had been moved in freedom from Pharaoh, but they hadn't yet moved in freedom from fear. And so there's these old things rambling around in their hearts and their minds that maybe they should go backwards. Maybe they should go back to the wilderness. Maybe they should go back to no man's land. But then something happens, and God speaks. He speaks to Joshua, and Joshua listens, and he believes the promise of God. And there's something about his faith that it's contagious, that those around him start to believe in the promise of God, and a new day starts. Where they enter into the land, we know that the Jordan River splits, we know that the walls of Jericho come down, we know that the sun stands still, and we know that there are over 31 kings in Canaan who had to go into early retirement as the army of God moved into the premises. That's what takes place, and it was glory years for Israel. It was an amazing time. They saw miracle after miracle. They received promise after promise. It says that they inherited and inhabited farms that they did not build, that they were able to enjoy wine from vineyards they did not cultivate. And perhaps you sit here today and you think, that would be great. It would be great to know some of those glory days, because it's felt a little bit like always living in the shadow of this thing that I've been facing, always in the midst of a fight, never seeing the breakthrough. Maybe you're in that place. I got to speak to a younger man in the last few weeks. And when I say younger, he's my age, so he's not really that young. And he was sharing that he was finding himself in a bit of that, what I would call that midlife misery zone. Have you been through that? You don't have to raise your hands, but you might recognize that as. It's that time where you feel a little bit stuck. You find yourself in a bit of a rut. I've said before that all a rut is, it's a coffin with the ends knocked out. It feels like a deadened place. You feel a little bit stalled. And sometimes, even though we've been a Christian for a number of years, we feel like maybe, yes, I know when I escaped Egypt. I know where I came out of enslavement. I know when the Lord let me out of those things. But in coming out of them, you just feel like you haven't entered into the promise. You can't remember the last time that you actually were able to overcome a temptation. You can't remember the last time that you knew answered prayer in your life. Maybe you find yourself there where you're a little bit discouraged and disengaged, and you start to ask yourself, is it me? Is it God? Is it the church I'm at? Maybe I should change churches. Maybe I should change Bible translations. I'd suggest that one. Stay at your church. But actually, it is a great thing to see just the freshness when you do change translations. It does just bring a different aspect. But we find ourselves in those places. There was a study done by the Reveal Research Institute, and they surveyed 1,000 churches over a number of years. And the result was 89% of people who attend church will describe their lives as more of a wilderness wandering than a promised land receiving. 89% of people who attend church will describe their lives as more of a wilderness wandering than a promised land taking or receiving. I trust we're in that 11%. I trust there's something different about us. I trust that we're not happy with the status quo. I trust that we're not going to stay here any longer. I trust that we're no longer intimidated, that there's faith arising in our hearts, that there's a courage in us, that there's a shout as we remember the goodness of God and we start to believe His promises that starts to carry us no matter the insurmountable obstacles that might be before us, because there's a supernatural force of God at work in us and through us that wants to bring about a radical revival, as Tanya said, so that many will come into the kingdom of God and have their eternal destinies changed forever. I trust there's something in us of that 11%, and we're not happy to be wandering in the wilderness, but we're wanting to be rising up and taking hold of and receiving the promise. You see, these people knew they were saved, but these people in this survey, they didn't realize they're empowered, and that can be a wilderness moment. I want us to realize we're not only saved, but we are empowered to be men and women of God, kingdom advances by which people can see that we are proclaiming the excellencies of the one who has brought us out of darkness and into His kingdom of light. Something different about you and me, and I trust we're in that 11%. Because this is what the book of Joshua is all about. It's about a people moving out of a wilderness and moving into the promises that God has. Out of no man's land into victory, where there's grace for every guilt that you might be facing, where there's strength for every struggle you might be up against, where there's hope for every moment of despair that you might have felt coming at you. But here's a quote that I like that I heard. The promised land is not Disneyland. Unfortunately, the promised land is not Disneyland. There's still going to be struggles. We see here with Joshua, there was struggle after struggle, but they took ground, they took ground, they took ground, they kept advancing, they didn't turn back until they inherited all the promises of God. And God's promise is that He's never going to leave us or forsake us, but that He's going to lead us. And when He leads us, He always leads us in triumphal procession. He never leads us into any moment, situation, or circumstance that is set up for your defeat. He cannot do that because His word says when He leads you in triumphal procession. If He is leading you, there's triumph in it, even amidst the struggle in the promised land that's not Disneyland. It's this thing of realizing that we want to be a people of fortitude. You cannot have fortitude without facing some adversity. The very word means courage in the face of adversity. I remember when I saw that word, the Lord spoke it to me a number of years back, and I saw it on a number plate. I saw it, felt Him speaking it to me, and then I saw it, I think it was at Mr. Price, and I bought the shirt, and I thought I was so proud to wear this word the Lord had given me, and then I started to have to live it out. Because the only way you can have fortitude is to try and have some courage in the midst of adversity. And Joshua 6 verse 2 says this, "And the Lord said to Joshua, see, I have given Jericho into your hand, its king and the mighty men of valor." You see, when you are being led by God in triumphal procession, you don't have to worry if the enemy looks a little bit too big. I remember when I was playing rugby under 13, and we would run onto the field, and I would try and assess how the game was going to go by the height and the size of the individuals we were facing. And suddenly a stomach ache would hit me if I realized it didn't look so good, and the sub would take my place. But with God, it doesn't matter how mighty the men of valor might look, because He is giving you the victory. And so we see this. God's not saying here, Joshua, take the city. He doesn't say, Joshua, take the city. You've got to win it. You've got to get the victory. You've got to do it. He doesn't say that. He says to Joshua, I am giving you the city. I've taken it, I am giving it to you. It brings a whole different emphasis to what's happening here. You don't have to go and conquer in your own strength. He's saying, I have conquered, now you go and receive that which I've given you. Some of us have to go and receive the promises that God's already paid for, exercised His power for, broken free of where the enemy's had his hands on it to make it available to us. We just need to be those that take it. Because Joshua here, we can see, did not need to live out of his circumstance, he got to live out of his inheritance. Here's a word for some of us today. We don't need to live out of our circumstance, we get to live out of our inheritance. Stop looking at that thing which is surrounding you. Start taking that stance which we spoke about and positioning yourself to receive that which is coming to you just because it's your inheritance, just because you've been brought into family, just because you have a generous Father who loves to give lavishly and extravagantly. Position yourself to receive and take your eyes off that which is surrounding you. He needed to realize that he got to live out of his inheritance. And it's a word that we see over 60 times in some form or shape happening place in this book. It's a book of inheritance. It's a book of what the Lord is giving to us. But there's something about moving in to receive that which He's giving us. And God told Joshua to receive the land. He's not saying conquer it. And there's that powerful statement. I heard it first from Bill Johnson, but I know it's been many years previously, that it says, we do not fight for victory, we fight from victory. There's still a fight. We've still got to enforce the victory that has been won. But when Jesus said, it is finished, He had made available every promise, every resource, every aspect, everything we need for life and godliness. He had made available His divine power to see us through whatever situation because it had already been done. And He said, it is yours. So we get to fight from that place of victory, not having to fight for victory. And so we see this unfolding here, that we get to enjoy this inheritance because of the lavish love of the Father that says that we should be called the children of God. It's this amazing thing that takes place when we look at what happens when we are reborn as believers. I love what Max Lucado says about this, and maybe some of us have had this thought about when we gave our lives to the Lord. He says some of us see becoming a Christian like this. says many people think becoming a Christian is like driving an old dirty car through a car wash. We think you take that old dirty jalopy, sorry, it's his illustration, so American language. Take that old dirty jalopy through and it comes out a clean jalopy. That's what he's saying here. But he says it's wonderful, this cleansing. It's the grace that Jesus has made available. It's the mercy of God. And we don't want to make light of that. But there's something else that happens. It's that old engine. It's that old V6 cracked engine that's been worn out by years, that's been overloaded by mileage. And what's happening in that moment is that old self is being removed. That old heart is being removed. That old engine is being removed. And it's being replaced with the very heart of God. It's being replaced with the very Holy Spirit of heaven. It's something, and the best way to describe it from an earthly perspective is like that Ferrari engine full of horsepower, torque, and acceleration is getting placed within, so that the person being saved can not only experience what it means to be cleansed, not only experience the grace of God, but they might know what it means to be empowered with the Spirit of God. There's something revving, something making that roaring sound that's taking place within. I'm no longer that, but I'm this. I've got a new DNA. I'm an entirely new person. I've been born again. There's something taking place within and through me that is not the old that's just been washed, but I'm a new creation. The old is gone, and behold, look and see, the new has come. And sometimes we need to be reminded of that. Because when we realize that when we gave our life to Him, He gave His life to us. Isn't that amazing? You give your life to Him. He gives His life, the life of God. He gives that to us, and we become an heir and a co-heir of Christ. What a beautiful truth. That same power that was available to Christ is available to you and me. It sounds sacrilegious, but it's the truth. He says the very same Spirit that raised me from the dead is at work within you, and you have been raised with me by the dynamic working of the power of God and have been seated in Christ in heavenly places, that you through intimacy have full access to the Father heart of God and every resource that is ours in Him. That you have been given everything that you need for life and godliness by His divine power through your knowledge of Jesus. That means every attribute of Jesus is at your and my disposal. That's an amazing thought. That means that if you and I have come here today and if we're in a bad mood, we can look at Jesus and say, if He didn't have to deal with being in a bad mood, neither do we. And yes, I am speaking to some people I can see here today. No, I'm joking. No, I'm joking. That same power is available to you. Anxiety didn't dominate Christ. So the peace of Christ is available to us. This is the life that is available to us. This is the promise that we get to receive. This is part of our inheritance. This is part of that land which is ours. We don't have to fight for it. It's already been given to us, allocated to us. We just need to go and receive it. We don't have to go out and God's not saying, George, you need to go and break all your bad habits, exercise your willpower and do that. No, I've got to choose and I've got to use my will to come into agreement with Him, but I've got to realize that He's dismantled every single thing that would dominate me through sin. It's been dismantled through Him, and I've been given freedom in the Spirit of God. Who the Son sets free is free indeed. I'm free to choose my will to the promises of God. What are you using your choices and will for? Yes, that excited me. I'm enjoying this pulpit. Promised land people believe there's strength to face every struggle. Are you a promised land man and a promised land woman? Promised land people believe there is strength to face every struggle and there's capacity to face every opportunity. I'm not calling it a problem. I'm calling it an opportunity, because whatever you might be facing is a moment for you to display the power, the goodness, the kindness, the love, the wisdom, the strategy, the outworking of God, who turns every situation to the good for those who love Him and are called according to His purpose. It's an opportunity, not a problem. And so we need to do some changing of our mindsets. When we look at this, well, how do we overcome? We need to change our mindsets, because so often our mindset is self-labeling. So often we have the mindset where we think, but I can't, I'm a warrior. Or, I'm a gossiper. Or in my family, we've struggled with drinking. I struggle with it. My father struggled with it. His father struggled with it. It's been something that's been passed down through the ages. It's a tradition. Nothing's going to change that. No. We've got to choose to stop that. We need to stop through our words creating agreement and alliances with the devil, and we've got to start speaking in synergy with the Word of God. Synergy means there's this convergence of activity. I speak it, I receive what the Word is saying, and there's this explosion of dynamic, supernatural, spirit-filled life that shifts and changes and transforms those moments and transforms my life. I don't have to say that. God, it's not His will for us to live in that defeated, marginalized, unhappy, wearisome life. That's not His desire for us. We don't see it in His Word. We go through hardships, but it's to become, to triumph through them, to be overcomers, to receive righteousness, His joy, His peace. Those are the matters of the kingdom. That's where we're called to live and to move. So Promised Land people think in a different way. Promised Land people don't think, I've got this problem and now I'm defeated. They think, no, I've got this problem, but I've got the very presence of God abiding within me. Promised Land people have a different way of thinking. They think Almighty God has taken residence in me. That means everything changes internally and externally. The old is gone, the new has come. It's a supernatural thing. It's the visitation of heaven into the midst of my situation, that I get to reckon myself dead to things. I'm dead to that. That word reckon means to compute. It means to calculate. It means to tally up. It means to work out and come to an answer. It means I'm dead to that. I don't need to look at that again. That attitude, that sin, that temptation, that behavior, I'm dead to that. And I'm reckoning myself, I'm tallying up, and I'm calculating and computing that I'm alive to the Spirit. When I sense the Spirit of God, something lifts, something begins to soar. There's oxygen that starts to come into me. I feel every fiber and molecule of my being start to fire and come alive. I'm not worried about those things that used to catch me up. I'm dead to that, but I'm alive to the breath and the Spirit of God. Is there anyone that's alive in this place? Don't you get excited at that? They don't believe they're stuck, Promised Land people. They believe they have an inheritance. Man, I'm running out of time. Frank, I'm going to preach at Tanya. They're standing up and cheering me on. Psalm 16, verse 6. The lines have fallen to me in pleasant places. Yes, I have a good inheritance. I want to declare to you, I don't know what's happened in the natural. I don't know what an earthly father has given or withheld from you. I don't know what a sibling has taken away. But I want to say through your sibling, through Jesus, the older brother who has broken forth on your behalf, and through the generosity and extravagance and lavishness and the goodness of your Father's heart, you have an inheritance. It is yours. No one can touch it. No one can move it. No one can steal it. No one can take it away. It is yours in Him. You just need to receive it. You need to move in, as I've shared, to living out of your inheritance, not being distracted by your circumstance. Joshua 6, verse 6. Take up the ark of the covenant, it says, and let 7 priests bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark of the Lord. So Joshua goes to a soldier and says, this is how we're going to fight our battles in this moment. And they think, great, he hasn't told them how. He's just going back and saying, God has said He's going to give us victory. They're thinking, awesome. We've got the ropes. We've got the ladders. We're going to scale the walls. We've been sharpening our swords and polishing our spears. We're ready to go. And Joshua is saying, no, this isn't how we're going to fight this one. Because there's a different strategy. It's a God strategy. It's unlike what you do naturally. There's something supernatural going to take place through His strategy to bring about supernatural results. And they say, well, what is this going to look like? And He says, the way we're going to win this war, the way we're going to bring down everything that opposes, the way we're going to bring down the heights of those walls that are facing us, we're going to carry this thing called the Ark of the Covenant, this rectangular box, because what it really symbolizes is the presence of God. And we're going to put priests in front of it and behind it, and the soldiers are going to go alongside that. And we're going to start to march with the presence of God. And the soldiers are thinking, what are you talking about? That's what happens in this moment. You've got to realize that He's saying, we're just going to march. You're going to keep quiet. We're going to march around and we're going to blow these ram's horns. That's the warfare strategy. You've got 2 million people, it says, that were with Joshua at that time. It's not a small crowd, 2 million people. You've got 40,000 soldiers. They're thinking, let's show some force. And He's saying, no, we're going to take the presence, we're going to keep silent, and only the priests are going to blast the ram's horn. 2 million people who have been moaning and nagging and whinging and whining throughout the journey. And this is going to have to be a miracle of God. Joshua 6, verse 10. You shall not shout out or make any noise with your voice, nor shall a word proceed out of your mouth until the day I say to you, shout, then you shall shout. I mean, this is an amazing thing. No war cry, no hand-to-hand combat. What sort of battle is this? This is a spiritual battle. Paul says in Ephesians 6 verse 11 that there's ways that we come up against the wiles of the devil. When you look at that word wiles, it means methods. It means the devil has a method. The devil has a plot. The devil has a ploy. The devil has a strategy. And in the same way in God, he's not passive. He's not sitting back. Let me tell you, he's seeking to bring about our demise. But in God, we have strategy that always overcomes. And so we need to see what godly strategy we can put into place. And Paul in 2 Corinthians 10, 3-4 is speaking about what you do when you face these strongholds. And he says in verse 3, though we walk in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty in God for the pulling down of strongholds. Some of us have come into this place and we're not believing the promise of God, the word of God. We're starting to think it's not mighty. I've got no strategy. I cannot come through this. I'm set up for defeat. There will never be victory. And we've been listening to the lies of the enemy. I want to say, though we walk in the flesh, you and me here today, we do not war according to the flesh. There needs to be a warrior spirit within us. For the weapons of our warfare, you've been armed and you're dangerous. You have weapons for warfare, are not carnal. They're not of this world, but they are mighty in God for the pulling down of strongholds. That thing that lifts itself up. That thing that tries to eclipse God. That thing that tries to magnify itself and make itself big, and God looks small in his ability and his power. We get to tear those things down. Just as Jericho was a stronghold in Canaan, sometimes we have got strongholds in our lives. And it's not bricks and mortar, it's mindsets and attitudes. And Paul says, the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty in God for the pulling down of strongholds, casting down arguments, and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God. What is a stronghold? A stronghold is an argument or a high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God. It can be a conviction. It can be a prejudice, it can be a philosophy, it can be an outlook, it can be a belief, but it's something that's interfering with God's truth. And I want to ask this question, I'll ask it of myself. Are there any strongholds that have a stronghold on you? Is there any stronghold at this moment that's got a stronghold on you? It's seeking to interfere with God's truth in and over your life. Because if there is, there's strategy in God for bringing that down. And one of the ways we figure out if that is at work in our lives is we listen to our language, because our language betrays our stronghold. What do I mean by that? You might say something like this: God could never forgive me. That's a stronghold of guilt. You might be here today and saying, I could never forgive that person. Yes, you can. That's a stronghold of resentment that's operative in your life. I know it's hard, but I want to say the promise exceeds the cost. There might be some of us here who's saying, bad things always happen to me. No, that's a stronghold of self-pity. You might be here and saying, no, I always have to take charge if I want it done properly. Sometimes that's true. But that can also be a stronghold of pride. You can tell the areas I need to deal with. I don't deserve to be loved. That's a stronghold of rejection. His perfect love wants to drive that fear out of you. I'll never recover. That's a stronghold of defeat. I must be good or God will reject me. No, that's a stronghold of legalism and performance. I'm only as good as I look. No, that's the stronghold of appearance. My value equals my possessions. No, that's a stronghold of materialism. You know how you start to figure out where there's a stronghold? You start to separate yourself from the people in the community of God, and you start to say, and you feel the pulling away, and God is saying, no, I want to pull you in and embrace you into family, that you know what it means to be part of a son and a daughter, that you get the full inheritance that is yours as a son and daughter of God. If you're hearing that too many times, you deal with that thing. A stronghold is this. Here's a beautiful point. A stronghold is a false premise that denies God's promise. A stronghold is a false premise that denies God's promise. It sets itself up against the knowledge of Him. So I'm going to jump forward now because we've got to finish. How do we deal with these strongholds? It's by keeping God in the center. the presence of God right in the midst of us. It's keeping Him in the center of our marriage, keeping Him in the center of our finances, keeping Him in the center of our parenting, keeping Him in the center of our business, keeping Him in the center of our decisions. It's not saying God's first and there's the rest, because then you can do that for 15 minutes and move on to everything else. It's saying, no, right in the midst of me doing life, living life, experiencing life, God is going to be in the center of that. And you start to say, Lord, how do I honor you in the midst of all of these things? Right in the center. In the midst of my integrity. Because when I feel He's on the outskirts of my integrity, then I feel maybe He's not watching at this moment and I can do what I want. But when I realize He's in the midst of it, it shifts things. We keep God in the center. And then there's the ram's horn. Here's the thing that I love. There are two instruments we see here that the Hebrews used when they were moving forth into these ventures. The first was a silver trumpet. The second was the ram's horn. The silver trumpet, so you can imagine they've got the presence of God. The priests are there. Everyone's quiet. They've got the ram's horn. We keep God in the center, and then we need to start to sound the trumpet. The silver trumpet calls all the people to assemble, but that's not what's being blown in this moment. What we're told will be blown to see the shout go up is the ram's horn. And the ram's horn, when you look at it, what it means is this, and I want to read the definition. The ram's horn celebrated a battle already won. It proclaimed the victory and the provision of God. I love this. So this is what God's saying. This is what's happening. He's told the 2 million people, the 40,000 soldiers, He's saying, we're going to have the presence of God. This is how we're going to fight our battles to see this wall come down, to enter and receive every promise that is ours. We're going to carry the presence of God first and foremost central with us into the situation. And then we're going to have the ram's horn that we're going to let blast. And no one is to make a sound. That means don't fill up the air with your moaning and your reasonings and your explanations and your defenses and your criticisms and your validations. God is saying, no, keep quiet. There's a certain sound that needs to be heard for the victory to be won. There's a certain sound that's going to bring down the walls. And it's going to be a ram's horn that's going to blast, and it's going to declare the victory is the Lord's. The battle has been won, and we get to receive His promises. That is a terrifying sound to the enemy. Can you imagine? I remember going back to my rugby days, I've said it. When we started trying to psych ourselves up, we're hitting each other, we're doing little war cries, and the other team just runs on and they look at you without making a sound. That was a nerve-wracking moment. I want to say when the enemy starts to see you start to march around him, when he's been trying to circle you, and you're carrying the presence of God, and there's a look in your eye, and there's a quiet sureness about you, and then you start to let something blast, and it's not complaints, but it's God's promises, His purpose, His power that you've read in His Word. You start to declare it. You take His Word like a ram's horn to your lips, and you start to blast His message out, His promise out, His purpose out. Let me tell you, the enemy starts to run because the walls start to crumble, and he gets a little bit claustrophobic. He doesn't want to get caught in the ramifications. He cannot bear to be where the praises of God start to get lifted up. He cannot linger in that place where truth starts to shine forth. So we do that in the Word of God. We start to declare it. We place it to our lips, and we start to let it explode out. What should I do? 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 I don't know what I should do. Okay, let me. Can I ask the worship team to come up quickly? Just quickly, run to the altar. No, come quickly. Let's read just to finish off. Joshua 6:15-16. On the seventh day they rose early. About the dawning of the day, they marched around the city 7 times in the same manner. And the 7th time it happened when the priests blew the trumpets. It's the promises, it's the purpose, it's the power of God they're starting to declare. When the priests blew the trumpets, that Joshua said to the people, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city." So the people shouted when the priests blew the trumpets. And it happened when the people heard the sound of the trumpet, and the people shouted with a great shout, that the wall fell down, and then the people took the city. They received the promise. You know, I've declared, I've put the ram's horn as, in a sense, the word of God to my lips, and I've spoken about His power, His presence, His promises, His purpose, but there's something in it when I've declared that we get to lift up a shout and we get to see walls come down. Are you with me in that? Can we stand up?